So I'm very glad to be here in Shanghai. It has been 5 times that I come to China, even though I was not here for a while, like everybody, because of COVID. And so I'm extremely happy to be back. I was in Beijing yesterday, even today. I'm going to go to Shenzhen beginning Monday next week. And then I will leave by Hong Kong, so it's like a big tour. And I really, I'm extremely happy to be here. I'm going to begin by to remind a reminder of a visit I had actually a long time ago. It was probably close to 10 years ago in China. I was invited by actually the French embassy to visit important organization that deal with the soft power. And I think you know basically what is soft power, right? Soft power is not hard power, meaning it's about culture, it's about communication and media, it's about internet, it's about values. The concept has been invented by Joseph Nye, a US scholar from Harvard. Actually, I was with him on Monday in Beijing, on Tuesday on Beijing. He was in Beijing on Tuesday for a symposium I also attended. And so I was invited by the French embassy and I went to China Film. China Film, as you probably know, is a very big organization that is in charge of promoting and helping actually to create a strong soft power in China based on the movie industry because it's a China Film. And so I went to the main building of China Film near the Tiananmen Square, and it was like a very huge series of buildings. So we walked a long time to find the right building. Then we find the big room, and it was like a room a bit like this one, basically, very beautiful, with nobody in it, a long table, 2 flags, the French and the Chinese, and I was there alone, actually with my translator. And then after a while, the head of China Film arrived, sit in front of me, of course in the Chinese side with the flag, and I sat in the side of France, basically. You know, I'm not the French ambassador. I'm not even a general consul, but it was extremely friendly that the Chinese invited me with this kind of flag of China, flag of France, her and me together. And we spoke for a long time, very, very nicely. And actually, I wrote all that in my book called Mainstream, and the book is translated in Chinese, so you can maybe find it. So what I'm saying, it's not secret because I published that with authorization, so it's already known. And we had an exchange on a lot of subjects. And that woman, the head of China Film, told me that, you know, we are Chinese, we want to defend our soft power. We need also our movie industry, and we are going to have it. And of course, I agree with that. I mean, I'm French, I also defend French movie industry, but that's absolutely totally normal that the Chinese do also that. And also the Palestinian and the American and the Japanese and the Korean. I mean, that's normal that everyone defends his own industry. And then to some extent, I asked her, why do you think it's important for you to have that kind of soft power through the movie industry? And she said to me, you know, we have values. We want to promote them through the movie industry and other elements, and we have the right to do that. I said, I agree with you and I believe you have the right, but what are your values? And then she answered me, you know, we have a different way of thinking of films. We want films probably less violent than the Americans, maybe more family-oriented, because family is important in China. We don't want movies with too much violence, some attacks against religion or attacks against values of others. And we believe movies should be more a dialogue and opening a nice discussion, conversation, than to have a fight between each other. And actually, I love that kind of defense of the Chinese movie industry. And I again, I am totally in favor of that. At the same time, even though I will criticize some American movies because they are indeed too violent, too criticizing others, and maybe be having too much sex. She also mentioned sex. She said, not too much sex in the movies. So I agree with that. However, I believe when you look at a Disney movie in the US, they are also exactly that values. Disney will define their movie industry as non-violent, no sex, no attacks on religion or whatever, and basically opening a conversation with the world. So what is interesting for me, and that's why I wanted to begin with this example, it's at the same time that's true that we might be very different, the French, the Chinese, the American, the Japanese, we might have some different view on cinema, we might have not the same values. At the same time, sometimes, even though we pretend, and the Americans are very good on that, pretending they are different, the values they defend are the same that the value we or the Chinese are defending. So that's basically the difficult question about soft power. In which way we are the same, in which way we are different. And to some extent, I can take a lot of movies from the US or from France that will be maybe a shock, or you might not agree with these movies. But I can also find some that you will say, oh, they are exactly the same than the value of China. So I think it's interesting to see how we can be different and also the same. So what I want to focus on tonight is basically a soft power from the perspective of globalization of culture. That's the title we mentioned. And just to excuse myself, of course, I'm going to be very quick and also extremely general and try to explain my point of view quickly. If you need more, if you want to have all the arguments and elements, you can go on this website, creativeeconomies.com. I mean, if you can, you can find a solution. And I wrote a very long article called Geolocalization. That's basically what I'm going to tell you tonight, with all the references are on these articles. And also the 2 or 3 books. I have 4 books translated in China. One is about the cultural system, cultural policy system in America. The title of the book is Culture in America. Then the book called Mainstream. Then a book called Smart. Then a book called Theater. They are my four books translated in China, Mandarin, and published in Beijing. So you can probably find them in the bookshop or in the library. I mentioned that just to say that, of course, I'm going to be quick, but everything I said is based on years of research, interviews, a lot of elements, and much more details, references. So I'm going to begin by the US, because actually we might be different, you and me, China and France, but we agree probably on something. We disagree with the US. And that's especially true about the movie industry, the music industry, and let's say culture and the entertainment industry. And you know, as a French, you know, the French by definition is about culture. We say, you know, we are the culture, you know. We culture with a big C, C capital. We love the art. We have a ministry of culture, a minister of culture. And in the US, you just have Disney, entertainment, and basically Hollywood and Broadway and you know, the music industry. And that was basically my way of thinking before going to the US. I thought, you know, we are the arts and they are just the entertainment, you know. Meaning maybe they make money, maybe they are powerful and successful globally, but it's not very good in terms of quality. We have the quality. Of course, it's kind of a prejudice. And that's what I discovered when I did my PhD and spent 4 years in the US. Because like every system, the Chinese one, the French one, the American one, are much more complex than what we think from outside. And that's absolutely true that in the US you have a strong movie industry, Hollywood, a strong theater industry, Broadway, a very strong music and book industry, and I mean, we can tell the truth. They are the most powerful one in the world. France basically doesn't exist. China exists a bit more, but the US is much more important, even though their population is just 300 kind of million, which is 1/4 or 1/6, or I don't know how many, from China. So the question is why? Why are they so powerful? And if you want to fight, and that's the French way, we want to fight against the US all the time. If you want to fight against somebody, you need to know him. Otherwise, you fight for nothing, because you are not able to understand your enemy. I don't think it's an enemy, by the way. It's probably more a competitor. But still, you need to know your competitor if you want to fight. So this idea of having the government playing a big role in cultural policy and the Ministry of Culture being so strong in France and not having anything like that in the US, actually it's not exactly true. The system is organized in a very different way. In France, we believe the government, the state, has to run the Ministry of Culture. And to some extent, that's also the way I think Chinese is thinking. The government has to define and run what the arts are and fund them, subvention them, put subsidies to them. In the US, that kind of thing doesn't exist. If you look at the statistic, you will have basically, if you take, of course there are statistics and there are medium numbers about tons and hundreds of thousands of organizations. Basically, if you take these pie charts, the pie charts meaning the budget of an art organization in France or in the US, whatever is the organization. It can be a theater, it can be a museum, an opera, whatever is outside of the big business. If you look at in the US, basically, you will have 7% of the budget of any cultural organization that will come from the government. Basically 1% from the federal government, another 1% from the art agency, 2% from the state, and 3% from the cities. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you have 7%. I'm right. Sometimes I make a mistake, so but it's okay. So 7%, it exists. It's not nothing, but it's very little. In France, the equivalent will be 60% or 70%. In the Paris Opera, will be 95%. So the part of the government is very little. basically 50% of the revenue of a theater, museum, dance company, opera, orchestra will be from what we call the box office, which means you pay the ticket to enter, to visit the exhibition or to visit to attend the opera. 50% is pretty high. It's much bigger than in France, much bigger. But then, when you look at that, the market plays a role about 50%, the government plays a role about 7%. What else? Somebody has an answer? What is the part, this one, this white big part of the pie charts? 50% are the ticket sales, 7% the government subsidies. What else? Who spoke? Sorry? You did? What does it mean exactly? You mean foundations, these kind of things? Okay, that's a good answer. Perfect. What else? You have also that a bit in China now, but and also we have that now in France, but it's pretty new. What the money come from? If it's not the people, the ticket sales, if it's not the government, and a bit of foundation, and he said subsidies by foundations. Try. Don't be afraid. I'm not going to to criticize you even if it's wrong, and it might be right. So what is very important to understand is the distinction between two kinds of fundings, which in general from outside we don't know well. There is a funding by corporation, basically, let's say Weiwei or Tencent or want to help a theater. Then it's a corporation that plays and gives money to a museum or to an opera. But in the US, that's just 5%. So it's not big. It exists. That's a private corporation that will pay money for a school, for a university, for a theater, for a museum, whatever. 5%. But we still don't have the answer about that. And that's about the secret of the US. This part, in fact, it's basically what we call philanthropy, but it's not the philanthropy you have here. Here, it's really a corporation that will give money for publicity or for advertisement, as you mentioned before. This one is not. This one is philanthropy mainly by individuals, not by corporations. So it's like you or me, we will give away some money to a museum, maybe a small one we like. Of course, we need to be a bit rich to do that. But if you're a bit rich or very rich, you will use a part of your money to give to the institution. And basically, it's about 35.5, because here it's 5.5, it's 35%. So it's a lot. And that's the very big difference between what you have in China or what we have with France. That's typical of the US system. But these 35% are not exactly what we think. Of course, it's a rich person that will give away the money to help a museum, a theater, a ballet, a concert hall, whatever. By the way, it's also the same with the universities, schools, sports, churches. All of them work in the same way in the US. And all of them, all these kind of institutions, will be what we call 501c3. It's a bit a barbaric term. 501c3 meaning article number 501, little c alinea 3. It's the number of the code of the tax system in the US that define a non-profit organization. It means you're not a government, but you're not a business either. You are neither private, neither public. You are in between. You are a non-for-profit organization. We have a lot of that in France, and you also have that in China. But what is important is because of that definition of tax deduction non-profit organization, the rich people that will give the money here will get a tax deduction, and a big one. So in fact, here, it seems like rich people give away the money, and that's true, but then they get a tax reduction. So at the end, it means the government pays that because you don't pay taxes, because you gave away that money. So it's an indirect funding. And that's a very thing secret that we don't know from outside. So it's a way the government helps the arts without, like in France or in China, defining and deciding where the money goes. Actually, anyone can give away the money, and the government will just pay tax deduction without deciding who and to whom. That's a very specific system. Another element, and by the way, I mean, it's a long discussion, and I did my PhD on that. If you add all the tax deduction that you give away, that the government give away for the arts, at the end, you have basically the same amount of money in the US per capita that we give away in France for public subsidies to fund the arts. So it means these two systems are not that different, even though in appearance, from the outside, they look totally different. They are not. Even though, of course, having the rich people defining the arts without any control of the government, it's a difference. And it has a lot of consequences. Another element that we need to know is that because of that, because of this non-for-profit sector, and also because of the strengths in the market economy at the same time of Hollywood, Broadway, the music industry and the book industry, the system can play on different levels. So you have the entertainment, the mass culture, you have the non-profit sector, and then you have a bit of public institution. All that create a large diversity of fundings, big commercial, non-for-profit, and public, all together. Whether in France, you basically just have the government playing a role in the arts. So that's a big difference. In addition of that, because of that kind of diversity of fundings, you also create a diversity of, I would say, levels and I would say scales of culture. So you can fund extremely commercial, Beyoncé, basically, let's say, Beyoncé, Madonna, which is like big commercial stars. And of course, the government doesn't help of that. But at the same time, you also help very innovative theater, classical music craziness, dance that is extremely non-commercial, that is also helped by the system here with the role of the government or the role of the rich people. Of course, it's a system that is mainly run by the elite and mainly run by the rich people, because by definition, they are the only ones that have a lot of money to give away to the arts. So it's a system that that pretend to be democratic, because that's true, everybody can give away some money, but it's in the hands of only a few people. And especially in the arts, whether the money goes and comes from the very rich in general, for sports, high school, university, religion, in the arts it's even more the rich. So it's not just the rich, it's the very, very rich that mainly fund the arts. And it has a lot of consequence about what is decided, promoted, or not. So basically, the system of fundings, the very diversity of non-profit, for-profit, public, and the difference of that kind of scales, money, with at the same time a diversity of choices, probably is one of the key of the success of the US abroad, because they are able to go to France, for example, with everything at the same time. So they can be famous in France with, like everywhere in the world, with, I don't know, Avatar and Kung Fu Panda and I would say all the TV series and music that you know. But at the same time, they are going also to be very strong with very arty things, very innovative music, and extremely different kind of culture. I just add to finish on that first part that the Frankfurt School, you probably know Adorno and Horkheimer, this kind of philosopher. Probably it's, some of you are familiar with them. Criticized for a very long time the US about the quality of culture. And they basically said, you know, because you're just market-oriented, you are going to have only big entertainment, and you lost the arts. You lost the quality. Basically, your culture is just a culture of entertainment. And I think that was pretty right, especially in the 1930s, 1940s. But today, the system, as I mentioned here, is very different. When you have a system that at the same time promote Indiana Jones and Beyoncé, but also Tony Kushner, Nan Goldin, the Wooster Group, the innovative LGBTQ culture, and also Latinos and black culture, that's very different than what Adorno was defining. And you remember Adorno said about jazz, you may know the kind of article he wrote saying that jazz basically is interesting, but it is not really music. And he had this very strange article saying, okay, jazz it's not music, it's radio. Of course, that's a mistake. Jazz is not radio, it's a music, and it's probably the classical music of the 20th century, at least in America, for black people and even for Americans at large, and a large part of Europe and the world. So you have to be careful when you criticize the US, because sometimes, and I've done that too, you don't know well the system, and so what you criticize is exactly not what's happening. Then the question is why in the US and abroad, especially for the movie industry, also the music industry, the US were so strong to be globalized. First of all, that's not new. Everywhere in the world, you have seen movies from you know, the 1930s or the 1940s. It was already extremely popular everywhere. Second of all, after the war, after the Second World War in Europe, Paris used to be a kind of a capital for the arts in the world, and that's true that New York became the new capital of the art in the world, at least after the Second World War. Maybe China will become in the 21st century, but for a long time, let's say from 1950 until the end of the 20th century, the US were so powerful that basically half of the product in the movie industry, the music industry, the book industry that went out in the world about culture were American. It doesn't mean that there is not a French or an Italian or a Spanish culture. That's not true. Actually, in Spain, if you live in Spain or in Brazil or in Argentina or anywhere in the world, in India, if you go there, you will see that a large part of the culture is national. You have a very strong music industry in Spain, a very strong movie industry in Italy, a very strong pop industry in UK. So it's not true that the US cultural industry destroy everything. Not at all. What they did, and it's even maybe worse, is that they destroy the other. I explain myself. If you're in France, basically we have a strong French culture, and then we have American culture. If you go to Spain, you will have a strong Spanish culture, and then American culture. The same in Italy, the same in Latin America, the same in India. So it means that everywhere in the world, at least for a long time, we had two cultures, our own and the US culture, nothing else. It means the strength of the US was to destroy the other. We still have and had local national culture, but basically the second culture became American everywhere. And that's a very bad thing for Europe, because if we are in a room like that with 20 or 30 students from 27 countries in Europe, and you ask, what do you like in music? What do you like in music? And so on, all of them basically will have a local artist that is very strong. Someone in Poland, someone in Italy, someone in Spain, in Greece, and so on. But nobody else will know the artist except the one of his own country. But if you ask, do you know Beyoncé? Of course, everybody will know Beyoncé. Everybody will know Springsteen or Bob Dylan, and so on and so forth. So the strength of the US was to be able to become the global culture in addition of the local one. That was really the 1970s, 80s, 90s. Then things began to change with new players. In the movie industry, Bollywood from India became pretty strong. Then, of course, K-pop from South Korea, or J-pop from Japan. Some Mandarin pop from China. Also, some telenovela in Latin America and so on. So that was basically the globalization of culture, where the US were still a big player, and at the same time, some regional culture became strong. And it was basically the goal of the woman I was mentioning in the beginning of the talk from China Film, to try to define that culture for China and try to be strong in this direction. Of course, something else happened at the end of the 20th century that re-changed again that kind of soft power and influence of culture and so on. What was this big change? What did happen in the late 20th century that, of course, changed again the map of culture? You know, you have the answer. All of you have the answer. Try. What did happen that changed everything? Everything. Sorry? Of course, internet. So what I was mentioning was culture before internet. And at that time was difficult. You're very young. Maybe what I'm telling you is like another world. But remember that a few decades ago, we had to buy CDs on CDs, which means physically. And these CDs had to travel through borders. And books were also printed somewhere. And even the movie, you needed to project them, you needed a physical movie. All that changed. And suddenly, not suddenly, it took a few years, but basically, no borders, no product, nothing. And by the way, that's also the big difference with the Frankfurt School. What was saying the Frankfurt School was, we had a factory, we had the rich owner of the means of production that run the factory. The factory was doing the culture. Then it became a goods, and the goods were traveling, and you sell it everywhere in the world. Today, there is no factory. There is no the goods. There is no, not even within the factory, the employees that are working for the same company all the time, and basically being part of the system. Now we have independent producer that hire whenever they need to do a film, a video games, or a music, they hire some artist by a contract that is called work for hire. So you're just working for the product, and the product himself disappears. It becomes services, it becomes content. There is no product at all. So the change is very big. And that's why also, since basically for 20 years now, the US is still a key player in the game, but some other players were able to enter the game because you don't need the factory, you don't need the borders, you don't need the goods, you just need a good internet connection to have the product being transferred from a country to the other one. By the way, if you take the biggest library in the world, which is la bibliothèque, the Congress Library in Washington, D.C., all the books that you have in it, and the biggest in the world, as you know, you can put them on the internet, and they will cross the Atlantic in something about 9 seconds. All the books in the Congress Library. So the way the things are transmitting from a place to another one is absolutely amazing. And that's a part of the new success of the US as a provider of culture, but also the new possibility for other countries to become strong with their own soft power within the globalization and digitalization. So we see here that we have two phenomena that aggregate. First of all, the globalization. Second of all, the digitalization. And that's basically what I call, to some extent, geolocalization. Why? Is because I heard so many times that because of the strength of the Americans, because also of internet, we basically are all the same. When you heard Elon Musk speaking, but that's true also with Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, Meta, or even the owner of Snapchat or even TikTok, even though it's Chinese. Basically, the American will say, you know, there is no borders anymore. There is no, everybody speaks the same language, kind of. In a way, there is no, I mean, the culture will be the same, and actually they will think that they are winning. I profoundly disagree with that. That's why I called it geolocalization. I think we are in a globalization. I believe, of course, we are digitalized, but the place where we are still very important. That's why I call it globalization, because you are somewhere. Of course, you can attend, you can see any movies or any read any books or looking at any pictures everywhere. That's possible. And when it's not possible, you find a VPN to do it. That's an option. But the reality is that, let's say, I am in Paris and I want to eat a Japanese food. Okay. I can have all the Japanese food in the world open for me. But I'm going to go to the Japanese restaurant that is close to my apartment. I'm not going to eat in Japan if I live in Paris. So, in fact, the fact that everything is open doesn't make any sense. If I am a high school student in Paris, I can have a friend in China, in India, in South Korea, and everywhere in the world. But actually, I won't. Won't because I cannot meet him or her, because probably I don't speak the language. So, in fact, we still have very strong borders on the internet. And the borders are not just censorship or limits that, for example, the Americans are fixing on many content. The borders is about language. is about the place where you are, the territory where you live. It's about the cultural sphere you are in. And all that makes very strong borders that you cannot, I mean, technically you can go, but you don't, because, again, I want to eat Japanese in my street. I don't want to eat Japanese in Japan when I'm not there. And at the same time, even though probably the Japanese food is better in Japan than in Paris, but that's another story. So that's why I call geolocalization in a way that we are in the globalization, but we still, and that's important, we still live somewhere. We live somewhere with our friends, in a place, in a territory, with our language, with our culture, the sphere of culture we live in, and we cannot basically escape that. So the question now is how, in this globalization, digitalization world, why and how countries like China, France, and other countries can exist in front of the US. I will say 3 things. First of all, the definition of culture is changing. When I was young, again, as I said, the arts was with a big capital A. And we were supposed to be the arts, as French, you know, arts. And again, the US were the entertainment. What is true is that the definition of arts changed a lot. That kind of very European hierarchy-centered definition of arts doesn't apply anywhere in the world today. It doesn't apply in China, doesn't apply in the US anymore, but not even in France. Today, culture and arts can be very famous and serious paintings or artists, I don't know, Sophie Calle, for example. She's wonderful. She does a new exhibition in the Picasso Museum in Paris. I love her. But it can be also manga. It can be also art created only on the internet. It can be also pure entertainment arts, or it can be extremely elite art, or it can be diversity art by Latino, Chinese, whatever, Africans. The definition of art is much broader now than it used to be. So that's the first element that open some possibilities for China, but other countries, to exist with their own arts. You don't have to follow the so-called art with the capital A, like France or Italy or UK. You can create your own art, more visual, maybe more internet-related, maybe more linked to, as I said, manga or these kind of things, and also have some value and be part of the same hierarchy. Whether before we were saying, you know, there is the art, and then you have manga, we don't care about manga, and cartoons and animation that are not important. Now, even in France, animation are sometimes has a best value than a local painter. So it's a totally upside down hierarchy, and the hierarchy of the art disappears, basically. So that's a good point for China, because basically you can exist in this world without the so-called European traditional hierarchy. Another big element is that cultural diversity became a key element. Cultural diversity was a very strong movement helped by the Canadian, by the French, the Belgium, the Swiss, and some others, again the Americans. We were saying basically 2 things, and the 2 things are a bit contradictory, but both exist, and it became an important discussion within the United Nations, the WTO, and so on and so forth, UNESCO. The first thing is to say, in cultural diversity, we need to respect and fund the big product, let's say a movie, 100 of millions, Spider-Man, let's say, and at the same time, the little guy. So the diversity is a diversity of scale, and also the diversity between like a very commercial, entertaining content and a much more arty one. That's the first definition of the diversity. The second definition is, of course, to say there is some American arts, French arts, but you should have also some arts from Rwanda. I was in Rwanda last week in Africa, and they do some arts. And I visited some artisanship, craftsmen, how do you say that? Artisanal, pottery, this kind of thing that are extremely valuable. The same for China, the same for Korea, and whatever I can mention in Mongolia or in a very little state. So then the definition is to try to protect not only the big player in the game, but also the little guy. So you have the hierarchy between market, the big commercial and the little non-commercial, non-for-profit art, and at the same time the big countries like American art, and also more traditional tribes, folklores, and so on. Both have to be helped. So that's the two elements of the diversity that are important, and I would say the success of a country is in general to be able to fight for the different levels at the same time. And that's why I profoundly believe that the future of the art for China is to take care of the big, China films, entertainment, big funding for big movies. We need that. I mean, I know some artists are saying we don't like entertainment. I don't agree with that. We need entertainment because that's the culture of millions of youth. That's the culture of millions of people, billions of people in the world. So if you want to be strong in soft power in China, you need to have this kind of movies. But you need also to nurture the little guy, the non-profit, little independent, not really known, a bit crazy guy, because first of all, that's where the innovation is. That's where the experimentation, the research and development for the future will be. And secondly, it also creates different kind of arts than just different kind of style. And that's basically what exists in China. You can go to a lot of galleries, you will see painters. I visited recently the M+ Museum in mainland China, in the side of in Hong Kong. I don't know how you say that. It's not in the island, it's in mainland, so in the other side of the river. The M+ Museum is wonderful. You have mainly only Chinese art, and it's incredibly rich in terms of diversity of piece of arts, and also rich in terms of money, because these pieces of art are extremely expensive now, which wasn't the case 25 years ago. You wouldn't have had a museum with extremely expensive Chinese artists before. So you need to play with the big game and entertainment, but also with the little guy that can become a rich artist because he's very talented. He has a lot of quality in his art. So I said, first of all, diversity of definition of culture. Second of all, diversity of culture itself. The third element, and it will be close to my conclusion, it's maybe the third big revolution after the globalization and the digitalization, the third big revolution for the arts and culture and for soft power. What will be the third revolution? What is going on now? Okay, that's AI, but for me, AI was part of digitalization, even though I agree with you, it's another step and maybe a bigger step than, but for me it was part of the digitalization revolution. But I agree with you, it might be another step within the digitalization, but something else. Environmental issue. Ecology. So why it's important for the arts? You might say it's not, but it is. It is for very many reasons. First of all, the artists, like you, like me, like everybody, will have to take care of the planet. So it means you don't destroy all your sets when you've finished the play and you put all that in the trash. Or you don't publish tons of catalogs for an exhibition that nobody will buy and nobody will like. You are not going to travel to Japan for a conference for 2 hours in a hotel and go back to the US. That kind of things, the artist won't be able, they shouldn't do that in the future. But I don't think that's the only element. I think there is many others, level or layout, if you want, level of the influence of ecology on the arts and culture, and then on soft power. The second one is you can, of course, not destroy the planet by your sets, but you can also discuss the planet in your piece of art. So that's typically what Damien Hirst, for example, and many other artists are doing. You in your piece of art, you mention some elements of the arts and you try to take the art seriously as a subject, environmental issue as a subject for your art. The third element of the influence of ecological issue within the art and culture, it's basically the propaganda, if I can say that. You can use your art to help the planet, to nurture some kids and youth, and to say, fight with me for the planet, and so on and so on and so forth. And a lot of artists are using their art to say we need to protect the trees, we need to protect the flowers, we need to protect the mountains and some other things. This kid, for example, went to some mountains, big one, to visit, to try to find his future. And I'm sure a lot of you are thinking that way today. And by the way, that's also the case in the US, in France, in many parts of the world. Another element that's very important, and that's very close to what you say about AI, it's that the environmental issue can also affect the kind of art you are doing. So it's not just by the subject, because you protect the planet or because you do some propaganda for the art, for the environmental issue. It can also change your art itself. Meaning, for example, we had a strong movement for a long time on doing paintings and visual arts with very cheap materials. And some artists are doing that today. They do their art using no money at all. Basically, they don't buy things. They just go in the street, take little pieces that are basically trash, and they reorganize that, creating their piece of art. So that's a very strong tendency. That's not new. It has been the case. We call it poverty art in the past and so on, but that's very influential. And a last element, and maybe the more important one about the environmental issue and the arts, is how your aestheticism, the way you think the arts will change because of the environmental issue. That's probably the more important one. A French philosopher named Bruno Latour, that I recommend you to read, very strong one. Try to work on that. What will be the new imaginary? So it's not just about putting some flowers in your paintings, but it's really rethinking your art. Maybe it's not going to be paintings anymore. It's going to be something linked to environmental issue. We might not have the answer now because it's coming. So that's, I think, another element of the big change between after the globalization, after the digitalization and AI. We say IA in French because we always want to be different, Intelligence artificielle, so IA. You say AI, so it's difficult for a French always to put it in the right side. and then environmental issue. So I'm going to finish because I don't want to be too long. And again, if you want much more in detail, I wrote a long conference actually in my university when I became actually a professor at that university on that issue, and it's a pretty long document. The question for now, and for me now, to conclude, it's basically what role China can play in this world. And I already gave you many answers to some extent. First of all, that's true that the US are still very important. I am not going to lie on that to you. And they are not going to disappear in terms of culture. They are strong for many reasons that I tried to explain before. At the same time, now you can have other players in the game. And that's already the case with Japan, with Korea, with India, with Latin America, Brazil, with some country in Africa, mainly Nigeria, a bit of Kenya, some French speakers also like Cameroon. But that's also true with China. You are already a big player in the game. What are the possibilities in the future? Of course, it is to be part of the digital movement, digitalization, and to play the role of the art within digitalization. But maybe you can be ahead on environmental issue, because that's a totally new field. And as you know, in the US, they are not very good on that, especially during the Donald Trump years, where they were basically against that kind of idea. So the reality and the question is how China will be maybe not the player number one, but at least one of the key players in the game very soon. So the answer is always this element that I mentioned today. Being able to be in the entertainment industry and at the same time in the art world, so playing on different scales. Being able to find some fundings that are totally linked to the government, totally linked to the private sector, but also in between by the non-for-profit sector and everything that can be imagined in these things, with also philanthropy in this world. Being able to defend a diversity in terms of culture, so it goes through diversity of funding, diversity of kind of arts you produce, but also diversity of people. You need more women in the field of the arts. You might need LGBT people more than before. You might need some different, some people from the north, some people from the south, from people that are more rural China, and not just the traditional player of the big cities like Beijing and Shanghai, let's say. You might need to be strong in terms of allowing a kind of freedom for the artist, meaning freedom in a large sense means just the artist should have in his mind what he wants. I mean, nobody is in the mind of the artist. I cannot imagine myself, I'm not an artist at all, thanks God. The thing is, I don't have this ability. I don't have the way to think differently. I'm too down to earth, if you want. An artist is not down to earth. He's a totally crazy person to some extent. And the values he has are maybe not mine. I disagree with a lot of artists because I think they are too crazy, they are too decadent, or too dandy, or too works in a different world. But to some extent, you need to accept that because the artist speaks to us a language that we don't already know. That is the language of something else, of research, of experimentation, of imagination, of the future. In addition of that, as I mentioned before, you also need what we call an ecosystem that will bring all these elements, the elements of funding, the elements of diversity, the elements of hierarchy that is totally upside down, the element of kind of freedom of the artist, and also the separation from the world of, for example, the academics or business. It's important that the artist doesn't have to be accepting the rule of the market or the rule of the academics, and with that creating a totally new ecosystem that will help all the players to be in this game and help China to be strong on soft power in the future. That's already the case, but I think you can do better. Like we French people, we can do also better. And I just wanted to give you a few tips on that direction, and I hope you will enjoy, and maybe some of you will become famous artists in the future. I hope so. Thank you.